When the life sciences industry gathers in San Francisco for the JPMorgan Healthcare Conference Week, will you be ready? It's important you're able to take advantage of all the opportunities. Don't get left behind. Big 3 Bio has created BioWeek SF, an online resource that guides you through event schedules, receptions, meeting space information, and consulting services. It provides exclusive savings and more to help attendees make the most of their JPMorgan week. Go to bioweeksf.com for more information. That's bioweeksf.com. I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. In the second installment of our 3-part review preview series of podcasts, we continue an annual tradition by sitting down with Adam Feuerstein, senior biotech writer for Stat, to discuss the year that was in biotech and what to look for in 2018. We spoke to Feuerstein about the themes that emerged in 2017, his annual Best and Worst Biotech CEOs, and what he'll be watching at JPMorgan and beyond. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Danny.
We're going to talk about the year that was in biotech, how the landscape is changing, and what's ahead in the new year. But let's start with the big picture for biotech stocks. What kind of a year will 2017 be remembered in terms of biotech stocks?
I think it was a year. It was sort of a little bit of a bifurcated year. You had basically the first half of the year where stocks were up. Investors were happy. It seemed like it was just going to be one of those years where biotech stocks outperformed the broader market. And then sort of mid-year, things kind of turned and stocks sold off. And, for most, indices sort of started to underperform the broader market. So, really the kind of year investors had pretty much depended on sort of how you were invested and when you were invested. Stocks that were sort of flying high in the beginning of the year sold off significantly in the second half of the year. So really, timing was key for performance in 2017.
Well, I noticed a story the other day in Motley Fool about top biotech performers this year. It struck me as an interesting list because there were a number of names, certainly as a former Bay Area biotech reporter, that would be familiar to you. These are companies that have been around a long time and suddenly sprung to life in 2017. I'm thinking here of companies like Sangamo, Alnylam, Nectar, and Zoma. Mm-hmm. What do you make of that?
I think a lot of companies. This was a year where, if we just sort of get away from the stock prices, this was a really good year for, biotech innovation. For lack of a better term. You saw some significant advances with cellular therapies, CAR T, the first CAR T approvals this year. You saw, literally as we're speaking of Danny, Luxturna was approved, the first gene therapy to treat a rare inherited disease was approved. You had some significant clinical data around other gene therapies this year. So, from the idea that, you want to sort of see biotech companies develop kind of, scientifically groundbreaking medicine for patients, it was a good year in that respect, and I think that's reflected in some of the performance of the stocks, that did as well as they did this year.
We're doing a series of year-end podcasts. Last week we spoke to Brad Loncourt of Loncourt Investments. Talked a little bit about the lack of generalist participation in the biotech market. Is that a concern? Does it mean that there's more upside here?
It is a concern, and I think it reflects what I said earlier about, the kind of the sort of the year being bifurcated into sort of a first half of outperformance and a second half underperformance. You saw significant outflows, of money out of the biotech sector in the second half of the year, and I don't know, maybe people were just investing it in Bitcoin or something, but you saw that, and that's a trend. So where I think, I haven't seen the latest figures, but essentially actually, I think the sector was sort of, from a fund flows perspective, it was sort of almost flat for the year, and that's definitely something to watch, and somewhat of a concern as we sort of go into 2018 to kind of see where money is being put to work in in the market, and whether or not biotech can kind of regain the interest of generalist investors.
Well, as you mentioned, it's been a year of exciting technologies coming to market. You mentioned the first CAR T therapies, the first digital pill, the first gene therapy for a genetic-based disease. We're on the cusp of RNAi therapies becoming a reality. Is anything knocking your socks off?
Well, I think, I feel like, honestly, I've written so much about gene therapy this year. I was joking that I'm sort of almost become like the gene therapy reporter. So I think those therapies and that technology, to me, I think is probably the most remarkable step that I've written this year, just from the potential of kind of a one-time cure for these rare inherited diseases. I think that has the potential to really change patients' lives, and from a business perspective, it's probably a little bit more up in the air, just given that we still don't know how these gene therapies are going to be priced and reimbursed. And like I said, today Luxturna was approved. The company is not going to disclose a price until early January, and then we'll see, sort of how, kind of how that rolls out, and how insurance companies deal with something like that, which could easily cost about $1 million per patient.
How about in terms of clinical failures in 2017? Any blowouts stand out for their surprise or their impact?
I think that, from a sort of immuno-oncology standpoint, there were some, I think there were some I would just call those sort of moderate setbacks in terms of kind of the rollout of, checkpoint inhibitors. We saw, AstraZeneca sort of stumble with their lung cancer checkpoint inhibitor. And I think that there's the big question mark in that whole world is probably the viability of the combination therapies. That's going to be it's going to be a big deal in 2018, especially as we look at the phase 3 clinical trial that Incyte and Merck are running, with an IDO inhibitor combined with a checkpoint inhibitor in melanoma, a phase 3 study. That's really going to set the tone for this combination therapy approach in immuno-oncology. There's so much investment and so much development going on in that world that this first kind of phase 3 clinical trial will be really important.
Well, clinical successes and market successes are two separate things. You talked about the pricing issues of Luxturna that'll be coming up. How challenging is it going to be for these new products to achieve market success?
Well, I think one of the trends you're seeing is the increased sort of the power and influence of the insurance companies to really sort of meter access to patients, and to sort of draw a hard line on pricing, reimbursement, again, access. A lot of people talk about the FDA being more lenient and approving more drugs. I mean, we're on the cusp of them sort of almost setting a record for the number of drug approvals in a year. But the downside of that is that with more drugs approved, some drugs could get approved that have sort of moderate efficacy, and at that point, it sort of empowers the insurance companies to sort of have more of a role in whether or not they're going to give their patients access to those medicines. So that's something that's evolved, and it's become increasingly important over the last couple of years. And I think in 2018 that will be a key question as we see some of these new drugs launched. Whether it's the RNAi drugs and gene therapies. What do the insurance companies do?
I think you can see this a little in the last quarterly call that Spark had, where they were talking about their considerations around pricing. But it's interesting that Luxturna is going to be the first gene therapy for genetic disease, and that it's not a life-saving therapy per se. It's something that patients may value much greater than payers. And I'm wondering how that may shape the decision in weighing that.
Danny, that's a great question, and Luxturna treats a rare inherited form of blindness. if you listen to the FDA advisory panel, I mean, the testimony from the patients was incredibly moving, and you could tell that this is a drug that has a significant impact and improvement in their lives. But again, it's not like a disease where it's not like an SMA where it's a fatal, or almost universally fatal disease. So yeah, what that role plays and how insurance companies deal with that is something that we'll all be watching now. With Luxturna and that disease, it's there's literally like 100 or so patients. So from sort of a big picture standpoint, the sort of the financial impact to the insurance companies is probably relatively small. But as you sort of look out more broadly to where gene therapy is going, you're talking, you can get into some big numbers when you talk about access to patients. So that will be something important to watch.
This is a time of year for Naughty and Nice List. You brought yours to stat. You picked the finalists and readers vote on them. Let's start with the best CEO in 2017. Alnylam's John Maraganore took the honor. What's the case for him?
John runs as CEO of Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, and this year they had the first successful phase 3 study of an RNAi interference drug. And for that, again, getting back to what I said earlier about sort of biotech innovation and the meeting, sort of the clear benefit for patients. He was a finalist, and I opened up the voting to my readers, and they chose him. He sort of second place was Ari Beltagrin from Kite Pharma. Obviously them developing one of the first CAR T therapies, and then Ari selling Kite to Gilead for $12 billion. He certainly is a top contender for CEO of the year.
How about on the naughty side? Worst CEO this year was NatWorks' Patrick Soon-Shiong. Why Soon-Shiong?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I have fun with the worst CEO of the year, and like I said, Patrick Soon-Shiong won or lost, I should say. I don't know how you want to describe it, but this year, and mostly just because of some of the, I think, some of the claims, sort of unsubstantiated claims he's made in terms of being able to, sort of bring technology to bear in the diagnosis and cure of cancer. Lots of promises made, but not a lot of deliverable, actions on his part, and a rapidly declining stock price. So he was voted the worst.
Well, let's talk a little about politics. It looks like the tax bill is going to pass, a victory for corporate America. There's an eye towards the potential for drug companies repatriating monies that are sitting overseas. Does this trigger new M&A activity, and will 2018 be a year driven by clinical developments or by M&A activity?
Well, I think that if anybody went back and listened to the call, we've been doing this call for a while, Danny. I think if anyone listened to the calls we've done in years past, I think M&A always comes up as kind of on the top of the wish list for the biotech industry, and I always feel like there's always a prediction like this is the year that we're going to see tons of M&A. 2017 was not that year. It was other than really kind of the Kite Gilead deal, there wasn't a huge amount of M&A in 2017, and as you said, so with tax reform, that looked like it's going to be passed, and repatriation of profits from overseas coming back into the country. There is a high expectation that a big pharma and maybe to some extent big biotech will use that money to make acquisitions. Whether that happens or not, we'll have to see. There's been some surveys out there where you can see companies maybe just using those monies like they have in the past for share repurchases or increasing the dividend, other sort of shareholder-friendly measures, and not allocating that money to M&A. But the thesis for M&A stands, and there are pharma companies who have depleted pipelines and drugs that are going off patent. So, I guess it remains to be seen how, whether or not we see a lot more M&A in 2018 than we saw in 2000.
The year also brought us a new FDA commissioner, Scott Gottlieb. How does that pick shape up?
Everyone loves Scott Gottlieb. would say he's probably the most popular FDA commissioner in a long time from an industry perspective. I think, look, I think to his credit, I think Scott has done a really nice job of getting into the job and sort of hitting the ground running. He's very active. He's done a lot. I think he's done a lot of. I think he's sort of come through and delivered on a lot of things that he said he was going to do, particularly when it comes to trying to speed up drug approvals, trying to sort of do what, from what the FDA is percent, from what they can do in terms of trying to sort of tackle drug pricing, whether it be, sort of accelerating or making it easier to get like complex generics approved. So, I think he's done an admirable job, and I think generally he gets high marks and, well deserved.
Anytime there's serious talk in the U.S. of government taking steps towards any kind of measures to address drug pricing, biotech stocks quickly lose their luster. We now have a deal maker in chief who boasts about his negotiating skills and has talked about having the government negotiate drug prices. Anyone taking this seriously as a threat in 2018?
I think that people took the threat very seriously in the beginning of the year, and I think you saw that reflected in stock prices that were very volatile whenever Trump tweeted or when he had his meetings, with pharma, and he talked about it. I think as the year went on and it became clear that there wasn't going to be a lot of actual action in Congress to do anything other than maybe hold the occasional hearing, I think most people started to tune it out. Now, I will say, 2018, I think it could come back in that, we're going to start thinking about the midterm elections. In 2018, the midterm elections in 2020. These things are going to become more important, and I think you could see sort of a renewed sort of bipartisan effort in Congress to do something on drug pricing. There is. I think there's interest on both sides of the aisles to have something done, and if it can become sort of a campaign issue, that could actually spur something concrete to happen. So, while right now I think, I agree with you, Danny, that right now I think people are kind of tuning it out. I think people will be tuning that back in during 2018.
With JPMorgan on the horizon, who do you want to hear from this year, and is there anyone you think might wow the crowds?
I don't have any. I don't really have any particular company in mind that I'm, super interested. I mean, we sort of keep going back to Luxturna and Spark. I think it'll be interesting, obviously, now to hear how they talk. I mean, I think they're presenting on the first day at JPMorgan. Hopefully, that at that point they'll have something to say, or they will use that forum to talk about the pricing for their gene therapy and reimbursement. And that will probably be a real big key on that first day. Celgene is always the traditional sort of first presenter on the Monday morning at JPMorgan. Obviously, they had their share of troubles in 2017 when they had to pare back their long-term guidance. So I think people will be looking to that presentation to kind of just sort of see what's going on with that company, what's going on with Celgene, particularly over the long term. And there's always a bunch of surprises at the meeting, and that it's a newsy meeting. I think the best sort of JPMorgan meetings are the ones where there's a lot of either a lot of deals announced, or there's just kind of a bunch of news. I mean, personally, as a reporter who covers this meeting, I like news, so that's what I'm hoping for.
Adam Feuerstein, senior biotech writer for Stat. Adam, thanks as always. Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.